Hello students, welcome to GTC. So in this video, we basically talking about immunology. So immunology is a part of our body system where which basically helps us for the protection against different pathogenic systems or any substance which is coming from the foreign will be protected by this immune system. So immune system or immunology is a branch of biomedical science that focus on basically on the immune system and its function and associated disorders. Immunity may be defined as the state of being immune or protected from a disease, especially an infectious disease. So, what is immunity? Basically, the state of being immune to or protected from a disease, especially against infectious disease. So, if any microorganism, for suppose any microorganism or a pathogenic substance has entered into our body, so that immune system which is basically act as a protecting system and provides a support or provides a protection against this condition. So immunology basically depend upon three major component. One is immunogen stimulation, second is humoral immune response, and cellular immune response. So what is immunogen stimulation? So immunogen stimulation means um, when any pathogenic microorganism enter inside the body, it will elicit an immune response. The elicited immune response will be counteracted by our body's immune system. So body's immune system, that is our humoral immunity or cellular immunity, these are the part of our body's immune system. So if I'll talk about what is immune response, so immune response as I discussed, whenever any pathogen, for suppose, let's talk about COVID-19. Let's talk about COVID-19. So in COVID-19, COVID virus, these are spike virus enter into your body. Okay. Now this will behave as a antigen. So antigen binds to say specific receptor. Now there will be a antigen antibody reaction. And our body immunity will try to neutralize this antigen. Okay, our body will try to neutralize this antigen which is entering into our body. So immune response means the response which is produced against the antigen which is entering into our body, that is basically called as immune response. So this is a process, immune response is a process in which humans or animals will produce a self-reactive protein. Humans or animals will produce a self-reactive protein called as antibodies, an adequate amount of cells in response to foreign organic molecule or macromolecules. So, in response to foreign organic molecule or macromolecule, that uh, that we can say that will produce a immune response. So, it has four major characteristics. One is discrimination, specificity, amnesis, and transferability by living cells. Four major property of immune response is there, which we will going to discuss one by one. So first is discrimination. So what is discrimination? So discrimination between self and non-self. So what is self? That is which of the component is of our own, which is comes from outer side. That will be distinguished by this our body. So this property is called as discrimination. This property is called as it is usually designated as the ability of an immune system to clear cut discrimination between self and non-self. This is called as discrimination. Next is specificity. So specificity refers to such as a response that is extremely specific either solely or inducing material antigen which is immune response, immune cells or antibodies. So and what is specificity? So specificity is that particular antigen or that particular antibody having the highly specificity toward the particular antigen. That's why whenever this antigen will enter, that particular antibody will going to bind and neutralize the antigen. So that is basically called as specificity of a property. Next is amnesis. It is commonly referred as a critical ability to elicit a large specific response much more rapidly on being induced by second exposure to the same or very foreign antigen. What it is saying, for suppose, let's talk about COVID-19. So when a person suffer from COVID-19, even in the first time, there will be development of some of the antibody. When that particular person further exposed to same antigen, there will be a production of antibody, and that will be produced in large amount, and that response will be very fast. So that property is called as amnesis. Next is transferability by living cells. Active immunity is basically observed to exclusively transfer from one particular inbred animal specimen to by the respective immune cells or lymphocytes, and definitely not by immune serum. Okay, next is terms and their definition. So there are two major terms that is comes repeatedly in immunology, is exotoxin and endotoxin. So exotoxin and endotoxin, these are types of toxin which is basically produced from different species of bacteria. So exotoxin is basically produced from gram-positive microorganism, and endotoxin is produced from gram-negative bacteria. It is from gram-positive bacteria. So these are basically produced inside the cell. They are produced inside the cell, diffuses out into the surrounding environment. Produced inside the cell and diffuses out into the surrounding environment. Exotoxin diffuse freely through the bacterial cell wall into the medium in which organisms are growing. They are freely diffuses through the bacterial endomedium because they are water soluble and can pass into the surrounding medium. This property is very important. This is very important to remember. What it is saying? So this can be, the exotoxin is diffuses freely through the bacterial cell wall to the medium because they are water soluble, can pass into the surrounding medium. Okay, this question was asked in GPAT 2023. So example is tetanoplasmin. Question was asked in GPAT 2002. Next is gram-negative bacteria, that is basically produce your endotoxins. So these are lipopolysaccharides and protein complexes associated with mainly enveloped microorganism. Gram-negative bacteria produce potent pyrogenic substance called endotoxin. So these are basically produce a potent pyrogenic substances. Okay, what it will produce? It will produce a potent pyrogenic substance. This question was asked in GPAT 2012. Okay, next is antigen. So what is antigen? As I told you, antigen is a substances which is exposure to our body from outer source. Sometimes our body own system also behaves as an antigen. So that is basically, that is a different concept. So that will be discussed. So these are, that concept is basically called as autoimmunity. Okay, that is basically called as autoimmunity. Sorry. Okay. So the any substances that evokes a immunological response, any substances that evokes a immunological response in an antigen or immunogen, this is called as antigen. Okay, certain component of the cell membrane also act as a specific antigen. Sometimes our cell membranes component, as I told you, autoantigens. Sometimes our body's own cellular membrane also behaves as a specific antigen. This is also sometimes behaves as a specific antigen. The response will usually selective against the specific spatial configuration of the antigen, which is called as antigenic determinant site, also called as epitope. So what this point meaning is, so antigen has a particular site. Okay, antigen has a particular site which is called as epitope. So epitope will always binds to the receptor in our body, that will leads to antigen antibody reaction. So that's why it is saying the response will be selectively specific spatial arrangement. So that epitope has a particular spatial arrangement. So the response when produced when that particular area of the antigen, that is epitope, binds to the cellular receptor. Okay. Next is uh, it binds to the T cell receptor of or antibody to produce the response. Haptens fails to produce immune response. Hapten fails to produce immune response in a native form, but when it binds to the high molecular weight carrier, it produces immune response. Haptens are antigenic but not immunogenic. Okay, so what are the characteristics of antigen? So antigen have three major characteristics. Antigen have three major characteristics. One is foreignness, second is size, third is chemical complexity. Foreignness means they are as they are exposed from outer side, they should be there should be a structural difference or spatial arrangement difference in our body that will create a discrimination between self and non-self. Second point is the size should be more than 600 Dalton. Okay, next is chemical. That should have a chemical complexity. These are the three major pillar of a particular characteristics of an antigen. Next, we'll talk about classification. So if we'll classify immunity are basically classified as two parts, that is adaptive immunity and innate immunity. Okay. Adaptives are again divided into two parts, natural and artificial. Adaptive immunity, innate immunity is also called as inborn immunity. It is also known as inborn immunity because this is present since birth. This is present since birth. Okay. In adaptive immunity, it develops over period of time. Okay, it develops over period of time. So these are also two type. One is natural and second one is artificial. So natural again divided into two subclasses. One is passive, active. Similar artificial is passive and active. So passive immunity, the natural passive immunity is basically obtained from the maternal. This is basically your immunoglobulin G. Okay, it basically provides passive. Next is active immunity. When you will suffer from any infection, like you were, like let's take example of COVID-19. You are suffer from COVID-19, and after suffering, you will develop antibodies against this COVID-19. So this is basically called as active infection. Next is artificial. Artificial again two type, passive and active. Passive is basically antibody transfer, and active is basically called as immunization. Okay, so acquired immunity is basically two types. One naturally acquired immunity is same as of adaptive immunity. These are basically two different terms. Okay, adaptive. Naturally acquired and artificially acquired. So naturally acquired, these are two types, that is active and passive. Antigen enter into the body naturally, that is from the antibody against the specialized lymphocytes. These are like example of COVID-19. Next is passive antibody, which pass from the mother to fetus via placenta or via infant of milk, like your immunoglobulin G. Sometime in case of immunoglobulin A also, because the immunoglobulin A is act as a secretory antibody. Next is artificially acquired. So artificially acquired is again subdivided into two class, active and passive. Artificially acquired active is when you undergo vaccination. When you undergo vaccination, the body will be develop a immune response, that is called as, example, for suppose I will take you Covaxin. You have take Covaxin during COVID-19. This is a typical example of active immunity. Passive immunity, it preformed antibodies in immune serum introduced into the body by injection. So what it is saying? So preformed antibody directly injected into the serum. So you might have about the state Kerala has initially started the plasma therapy. They have started plasma therapy. So what is this plasma therapy? So this therapy is basically characterized by isolation of plasma, and this plasma contains circulatory antibody that will be injected into the body, that is called as plasma therapy. Okay, so that will this is basically your preformed antibody that will directly injected into your body. Next is, you can see GDC has announced a new batch that is completely in English language for the South Indian students. So this will specifically for the South Indian students. So this will provides you a 500 plus daily live classes, 25 plus 23 plus hard copy books, 500 plus pre-recorded video lectures, 500 plus online test series, 500 plus daily practice papers, and 36 plus previous year papers. So if you want to join and make your career more prominent, more brighter, so you can contact by this below given number. So these are the faculty which are expert in their respective subjects. So they are highly qualified and expert in their particular subject. So they will going to teach all the subjects that comes under Gpat syllabus. Okay. Next is innate immunity. So innate immunity is present. As I told you, innate immunity is present since birth. Whenever we were present, so this immunity is still in the birth, still in our body since birth. So there will be a evolutionary primitive and relative non-specific. So this is basically developed over since of birth, that is from developed from your maternal body. It provides a early defense against pathogen before adaptive immune response can develop. So this is basically we called as a primary primary immune response. We can tell it as a primary immune response. Okay. So the principal component is innate immunity system includes first one is physical and chemical barriers such as skin and antimicrobial chemical produced by the epithelial cell surface. So this is very important. The physical and the chemical barrier such as skin and antimicrobial chemicals are basically produced by the epithelial surface like your lysozyme, lactoferrin and dipensine. These are comes under your we can say physical barrier, and this is the first. Next is soluble effector proteins include complement systems and mediator of inflammation. These also comes under your innate immunity. Cellular components such as phagocytic cells, so the cells which involved in phagocytosis. So example is neutrophils and macrophage, natural killer cells and innate lymphoid organs. Last is cell associated pattern recognition receptor or sensor. So these are four different type of barrier which is responsible for the primary immune response. Next is acquired immunity. So what is acquired immunity? Acquired immunity is a type of immunity that basically we can say that basically also called as adaptive immunity, which basically develops during exposure of a particular antigen. So this is not present since your birth. It will develop over a period of time due to exposure of different we can say different pathogenic organism to your body. Okay, so let's talk about acquired immune system. So acquired immunity is also known as adaptive immunity. Okay, it is a crucial component of the immune system that provides a specific and long-lasting protection against pathogen. This provides a specific and long-lasting pathogen against protection against pathogen. So, what are the characteristics of acquired immunity? First one is specificity. This particular, we can say this particular pathogen the immunity having specificity for the recognizing target specific pathogen. That particular immunity this acquired immunity has the capacity to identify or to specify the specific pathogens. Second is memory. So it has a long lasting memory. The capacity to remember past exposure to pathogen and respond more efficiently upon subsequent encounter. The memory. Next is diversity. The immune response can recognize and respond to very vast range of antigens. So immune response can produce against vast range of antigen. Next is self tolerance. The ability to distinguish between self and non-self. This is very very important property to remember because self and non-self discrimination will decide whether decide the immune response. Sometimes our body's own system also behaves as a antigen. So that is called as autoimmunity. So the autoimmunity leads to development of different autoimmuno disorders. Okay, that relates to autoimmune disorders. Active immunity. So active immunity refers to specific immunity obtained from the development within the body of antibody or sensitized T lymphocytes. So with a critically neutralizing or destroying the infective agents. Okay, this is comes under your active immunity. Okay. Next is what is the difference between innate immune response and adaptive immune response? As I told you, innate immune response is a antigen non-specific. There will be no non-specificity of the antigen. This will provide a response in general. Okay. Second one is adaptive immune response. So adaptive immune response is basically antigen specific. So antigen specific means the response will very specific towards the antigen. Second is response time. The response time usually very fast in case of innate immune response, because the like your our physical barrier like skin, physical and chemical barrier, complement system, natural killer cells, these are present throughout our body. So this will provide a rapid immune response, that is due to innate immune response. Second is adaptive immune response. This is basically provides a slow response. Next is diversity. Diversity is less diverse, and adaptive immune system having high diversity. Memory, innate immune response having very absent or very low memory, whereas adaptive immune system having present of uh, adaptive immune response having the memory to produce to remember the infection and produce antibody against subsequent involvement. Next is measure. What are the measure? This is this table. This column is very important. The what are the innate immune response cell types? So major cell types involved in immune response is our phagocytosis cells, natural killer cells, and others. Whereas adaptive immune system include our B cells, T cell, antigen presenting cells. Okay, so B cells, these innate immune response found in vertebrates and invertebrates, whereas adaptive immune system found in only in case of jawed vertebrate. Okay, next is characteristics of primary immune response and secondary immune response. So primary immune response is the reaction of the immune system when it contact with the antigen for the first time. When the we can take the example of COVID-19. So first time one person has suffered from COVID-19. So there will be production of a response there, that is called as primary response. Now this in our memory system, that response has been noted. Okay, when the subsequent sometimes if the person will exposed to COVID-19 for the second time, so there will be a production of immune response, very rapid and very fast response. Okay, secondary immune response is the reaction of the immune system when it contact with an antigen or a second or subsequent times. Next is appearance. So appearance mainly in the lymph nodes and spleen. So appearance is basically in the lymph nodes and spleen. Secondary immune response appearance mainly in the bone marrow and then into the spleen and lymph node. So primary immune response basically produced by our spleen and lymph nodes. The secondary immune response is produced by bone marrow and then with spleen and lymph nodes. Next is occurrence. The occurrence in response to the primary contact of antigen, the occurrence in response to subsequent exposure of same antigen. Antibody peak. The antibody levels reach to the peaks in 7 to 10 days. The antibody level reach to the peak in 3 to 5 days. Affinity or antibody. Low affinity to their antigens, high affinity to their antigens. Responding native B cells and T cells. So these are involving memory B cells. This question was asked in Gpat 2013, that which cell involved in secondary immune response, that is your memory B cells. Next is antibody. Both thymus dependent and thymus independent antibodies are involved in the primary immune response. Only thymus dependent antibodies are involved in the secondary immune response. In case of primary immune response, both thymus dependent and thymus independent antibodies are used. But in case of secondary immune response, only thymus dependent system is involved. So lag phase is around 4 to 7 days. Here lag phase is around 1 to 3 days. Okay, these are the type of primary and secondary immune response. Next is active immunity and passive immunity. What is active immunity? When the exposure to an antigen that leads to active immunity. Passive immunity is no exposure to the antigen. So active immunity is exposure onto antigen, passive immunity is no exposure to antigen. So immunity is achieved by injecting antigen. So active immunity is achieved when there is a injecting antigens. So immunity is achieved by injecting antibody or immune cells in passive immunities. Activation of immune system takes place in case of active immunity, but there will be no activation of immune system takes in case of passive immunity. Immune system develops over period of weeks. immunity develops immediately. Immunoglobulin, immunological memory develops, there will be no immunological memory develops. So there are immunity can be classified as active immunity and passive immunity. Active against infection due to natural activity due to infection, artificial active due to vaccination. Similarly, passive natural is due to maternal antibodies, passive artificial is due to monoclonal antibodies. Okay. Next is humoral immunity. So humoral immunity is again the immunity can be two types, that is humoral immunity and cell mediated immunity. So humoral immunity is mediated by B cells, and humoral immunity, this is very, very important from exam point of view. Humoral immunity is mediated by B cell, whereas cell mediated immunity is mediated by T cells. So humoral immunity produce antibodies, whereas cell mediated produce, there will be no production of antibodies. So in case of humoral immunity, there will be no involvement of cytokines. In case of cell mediated immunity, synthesize and secrete cytokines which directly kill the target cells. Okay. B cell produce antibody specific against the foreign substances. B cell produce antibody specific against foreign substances, whereas cell mediated antibody forms a various function when antigen presenting cells bring antigen to the secondary lymphoid organs. Okay, there are there is the two type of immunity, that is humoral immunity and cell mediated immunity. So humoral immunity is mediated by B cell, cell mediated immunity is made by T cell. So B cell having two part, B cells having two part. One is memory cell, another one is plasma cell. One is memory cell, another one is plasma cells. Okay. Next, let's talk about B cell. So B cell, its production, B cell production and maturation is carried out in the bone marrow. B cell production and maturation is carried out in the bone marrow. B cells having two major types of cell, as I discussed. The one is your plasma cells, that is involved in production of antibody. Another one is memory cell, which involved in memory function. It also serves as a antigen presenting cell. It also serves as a antigen presenting cell. It produces antibody against pathogen that enhance the phagocytosis of extracellular pathogen. Such type of antibody is called as humoral antibody. So you have to remember, humoral antibody is mediated through your B cells, whereas cell mediated antibody is cell mediated immunity is mediated to your T cell. Some of the pathogen that cannot be killed by that can be survive inside the phagocytic cell can be killed by your cell mediated immunity. Next is cell mediated immunity, that is basically both T cell is used. T cells are basically both regulatory and cytotoxic. T cells are involved in production of specific immune response, that is called as cell mediated immunity. That entire process takes 36 hours to accomplish the full effect. T cells are produced in the bone marrow but mature in your thymus. Okay, T cell does not produce antibody, but it so effective function when antigen presenting cell bring this antigen to the secondary lymphoid organ like your spleen, thymus, lymph nodes. Okay, it is classified into two major class, T helper cell and T cytotoxic cell. T helper cell having CD4 glycoprotein, whereas T cytotoxic cell having CD8 glycoprotein. So the ratio of the ratio of T helper to T cytotoxic is around 2:1. Okay, the response is around 2:1. Okay, what we have discussed till now is, so we basically discussed about different type of immunofunctions. So we are basically talking about immunology. So we talked about what is basically immunology means, what are the different type of immune response is there. Next we talked about antigen, what are the different type of antigens, what are the specificity, how this antigen binds to the antibody. Now we talked about classification of immunity. So immunity is basically of two type, adaptive immunity and innate immunity. Innate immunity is also known as inborn immunity. This inborn immunity is basically present since your birth. So this basically present since your birth. Okay. Next is Okay. Next is our next we talked about adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity is basically developed over a period of time upon subsequent exposure. Next we talked about uh, types of acquired immunity: B cell immunity, T cell immunity. So B cell is mediated humoral response, T cell is mediated cytotoxic cell mediated immunity. There are two major immune response component which is basically provides the immunity. So we also talked about primary immune response, secondary immune response, what are the organs involved, what are the specificity, duration, all the things we have covered. Okay, the next and the last part of the today's video is today's class is role of different T helper T cells. So like T helper cells have assistance assistance or potentiate a exposure of immune function by other lymphocytes. T suppressor cells suppresses or impair the function of immune function by other lymphocytes. T cytotoxic cell brings about a cytolysis or cell death of targets. Next is TD cells. So this basically recruits or regulate the variety of non-specific blood cells and macrophage in the expression of delayed type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. Next is T regulator cells, control balance between enhancement and separation of response to the antigen. Okay. Next is B cell. So B cell or B lymphocyte, it is proliferate and mature into producing antibody producing cells. Plasma cells, these are mature and actively antibody producing cells. Next is memory B cells. These are long-lived cells which remains within the body and allow the body to the respond more rapidly in case of subsequent infection. So that is the function of B cells. Okay. So next is null cells that are also called as natural killer cells. These basically causes cytolysis and death of the target cells. So this basically causes cytolysis and death of the target cell. So these are the different types of T cells that involve provides a such type of functions. Okay, that's all for today's class. If you have any doubt, you can ask. And in the next class, we basically we will talk about different type of immune response. Sorry, vaccines in different type of vaccines. What are the vaccines? How the vaccines are produced? Okay, we'll talk in the next class. Thank you.